Alrighty, folks, he is back. Yes, the CEO of Bigger Pockets, the most influential residential real estate platform on the market, has agreed to come back for a second conversation. We are so lucky. Scott, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me back, and thanks for having me on the first time, Michael.
Absolutely. The audience loved you. They loved your just straight shooter, real discussion. And we're going to go deep in a topic that's important to me because you have a unique lens, a unique history over investment real estate. So I wanted to share with you my belief of where I think new investors go wrong most often. And I think you're the guy to tell me I'm right, wrong, help me make it better. So you ready for this?
Let's do it.
So I think most new real estate investors, quite frankly, have the wrong initial goal. I think a lot of people come to residential real estate because they want to make money. They want to get wealthy. They want, they want to purchase, right? Maybe they fortunate enough to have some capital, and they all want to kind of jump the line. What's the best market? What's the best vehicle? What's the this? What's the that? And I believe that real estate investing is a skill. I believe it's no different than learning a language, playing an instrument, or playing a sport. And because it's a skill, it can be learned by everyone, but it also has to be practiced. And there is an order to any skill. And I believe most people have the wrong goal. So I have more to say, but I don't want to dominate this. How does this feel kind of off the cuff, just first reaction?
Yeah, I'm interested to see where you're going with this because, certainly the goal for real estate investing, I think, is essentially every single person who gets into real estate investing, you and I included, are doing it for the wealth creation or preservation aspect of it, and likely with cash flow as a blend in that. So I just need to hear the end of your thought to see where you're really going with it.
Awesome. Very cool. So again, because it's a skill, I believe most real estate investors, again, don't have this as their first goal. And step one for me is you have to learn what an average deal is. Okay, what does that mean? And again, I think it means an average deal in your buy box, because I believe where most new real estate investors go wrong is their aperture or their focus is just so broad that they don't get economies of scale. They don't get the practice. They don't get the reps. They don't learn anything. They're in Dallas and then Miami and then Nashville, and then they're in single families and then hotels and then Airbnbs and midterms and assisted living and yada, you know the drill. So what I tell or suggest all new investors do is they sit back, they create what I call a buy box, which is a very fine set of criteria. And I will give you my buy box from 2003 in a minute as an example. And then what you do is you only look at that buy box for 3, 6, and quite possibly 9 months, which means you ignore everything else. Because until you have learned the skill of learning average, you don't have a proof point. You don't have a proof of concept that you can then find great deals. So here's my buy box as an example in 2003. So again, my story, Scott, is I live in the Silicon Valley. I wasted a year trying to find cash flow here. It didn't exist in 2002, doesn't exist today. So I get introduced to a market called Fresno, California. It's Central Valley, 2.5 hours away. It cash flows, but I know no one. So what I do is I spend, 2 months interviewing people, asking, where should I invest? Where should I invest? Where should I invest? Ultimately, most of them talk about this area of town called the Mayfair. 93703. So the first thing I do is I take Fresno, which at the time is about 500,000 people, and I go to a single zip code. That is still too broad. I then say single family homes. Why? Well, one simple reason. It's all I know. I don't know duplexes, quads, apartments, mobile homes, anything else. Then I decide that that's even too broad. I then say I want 3 or 4 bedrooms. So I don't want too small or don't want too big. And then I actually have to add criteria. I think it was like 1,500 square feet to 2,000. Now, why did I add all of this criteria? Scott, I had a day job. I had about 20 minutes a day where I could go to my phone or my computer, at the time computer, later phone, to look at what's available. And again, I'm only shopping on the MLS, not doing mailers, postcards, anything of that nature. So this criteria produces somewhere between 20 and 40 active listings. I look at that criteria, Scott, no lie, almost 3 years. If you were not 93703, single family home, 3 or 4 bedrooms between 1,500 and 2,000 square feet, I didn't know you existed. But if you were that, I knew in the matter of seconds whether you were a good or great or bad deal, because that's all I looked at. And I took the variables, rent, expenses, taxes, insurance, and I just started doing the math. And ultimately, I created what I call yield, basically return on capital or return on cash. And that's how I learned. I learned an average deal in 2002 produced an 8% yield. I'm not happy with average. So a good deal.
Is that 8% cap rate, or is that an 8% cash on cash, or how did you
Cash on cash, cash on cash. I only do cash on cash. I call it a bond. I basically turn every asset into a bond, right? If I'm going to, and it's very simple, just for the audience. Denominator, down payment, closing cost, make ready. Numerator, expected yearly cash flow. That turns into a decimal, multiply by 100. It's a percentage. But yeah, so what I did is I did that. I first learned average, which was 8%. And I was never happy being average. So I would look for 9.5, which I called a good deal, 1.5% better, or 11%, which is a great deal. So 3% better. Now, what I think all new investors should do is should make the goal of learning what an average deal is for their desired buy box. And by happenstance, ignore everything else. Because if you can do that, you could build confidence. You could finally know with certainty what a good or great deal is. Shoot, you learn what a bad deal is. So I think that is what I think is a good first goal. So ask questions, poke at it. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, well, I would love to just react holistically to what you said there, because I agree with a lot of it, and I have a couple of frameworks that might even help simplify a couple of items and to what you're discussing.
I like it.
So let's zoom out and think about real estate as why do we get into real estate in the first place, right? And let's forget leverage. Let's just look at the house, right? I bought my first duplex for $240,000 in 2014, right? Mm-hmm. And today it's probably worth 550, 600,000, depending on time of year, market conditions, all that kind of stuff. Around there, I probably bought it at a 5.5%, 6% cap rate at the time. I used a low down payment FHA mortgage in order to owner occupy it. Right now, if I zoom out and I say, that's the wealth builder, right? Is the cash flow, loan amortization, and appreciation of that property. If I'd bought the property for $260 and gotten a terrible deal, I'd still be rich, or on that property, right? Mm-hmm. If I bought the property for $220 and got a great deal, 10% reduction in price off list, I'd still be doing great. 90% of the return, or let's call it 75% of the return, has been a result of just buying the property and hanging on to it. Another 15% of the return comes from how I operate the property. If I had known what I was doing and not been so lazy and not been so stupid, I'd have another, $30,000, $40,000 in wealth, because I would have done preventative maintenance and not had certain problems with it. Right. And then 10%, 5 to 10% at most on this at this point is based on the purchase price. And by the time I'm done with it 30 years from now, less than 1% of the return will be based on the purchase price. So there's this obsession in the real estate community of finding a great deal. And I'm no exception. Despite stating that math to you, I then obsess all the time over finding a great deal, which is exactly what you just described there. So I see you agreeing with me on both points, and we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about how to find a great deal in a target market. So there's another concept we have to define here, right? This is a deal that worked, right? It wasn't a great deal. I don't think I got a great deal on that property at that point in time, but it was a deal that worked. It cash flowed. It worked for me from a house hacking standpoint. My financial position was such that there was very low risk of me not being able to hold the property indefinitely unless some catastrophe happened, right? If I bought that property and it rented for $900 a month or $1,000 a month, then it wouldn't have worked. It would have bled me money. It rented for about $1,100 on each side, so $2,200, almost close to 1% roll property at that point, right? If it had rented for $900 a month and it was costing me $800 a month to hold it, it would not have been a deal that worked. So if I bought any deal that worked in that time in Denver, I would have had a very similar outcome. Okay, now in that you pick Fresno, California, right? I love it, right? I have a very similar buy box in Denver, Colorado, right? I like two bed, one bath, 750, ish to 1,000 square foot units. Maybe I'll put a third bedroom if I'm getting close to 1,000 in there. I love one bed, one bath. I don't love funky layouts. I love the stuff that's going to be easy to rent long term because I view real estate as an inflation adjusted income stream, and I don't want the weirdo wacky stuff, which it sounds like is exactly what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
I like the same year, 1950s, same ish years, 1950s construction. I know those problems. I know who to call on those types of things. So there's a real benefit to sticking in your lane, just as you discussed. And I'm spread out in a couple of different zip codes around Denver, because there's a couple of pockets that operate in very similar ways, and I'm comfortable with all of them because they have a similar dynamic and similar kind of long-term appreciation potential. On one side of town, the appreciation or the gentrification or the path of progress, whatever you want to call it, is moving south from the highway, and the other side of town is moving north from the highway. So it's just different ways that the landscape's going. So very similar. One thing I just tweak about there for folks listening is you're talking about how to look at all the active listings. And I think that for a lot of folks, the active listings can be very misleading, because when you look at the active listings in your zip code, if you were to pull it up right now, we'd see bad deals. We'd see that have been sitting there for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months on there that have had the price lowered a couple of times. And you can't really tell. If you look at that, you're like, oh, the cheapest or the best cash flowing deal relative to the others that are for sale right now is the good deal. But that's the mistake. What is actually, you can shortcut this whole period by just looking at everything that has sold in the last 180 days. And that's a super easy toggle on any listing site. Your agent could do it almost in seconds. And from there, you can look at what is actually going on. And if there's no deals that have sold in the last 180 days in 90703 or whatever it was that right?
Yeah. 93703. Yep. Good job.
9703, right? If there's no deals that have sold in the last 180 days that would have met your criteria, you're in fantasy land. There are no deals that work, and you should give up and go work on your day job or whatever. But if there are 5 deals that have sold in the last 180 days, now you know that every 18 days, or what is that, every 36 days, if there's 10 in the last 180, 5 in the last 90, then you know that once every 2.5 weeks, on average, a deal that works,
something pops up,
deal is going to hit in your market. And when that happens, now you know. So you've made that decision right now. This is how you work already, Michael, in your brain. I know it, right? Because when a deal hits the market that meets your criteria, that's at the top of the list, you probably don't, drop exactly what you're doing at that second to go offer it, but you cancel your dinner plans and you get ready to go and offer on it because something happened. And that's it. You just know you've already made the decision about what you're going to buy. You've committed it to writing, hopefully, and got your agent, if you're using an agent, in place to send you those. And then you react when it comes on the market, because that property is not going to sit for 2 weeks while you kind of get your act together and think about it. You have to make that ahead of time and do it. So that's the only tweak I would give to what is otherwise, I think, a very aligned philosophy in terms of how to score a good deal and really refine your buy box.
Yeah, I love it, because again, the whole activity of I look at your buy box every day, and in the first 3 to 6 months, I want you tracking it. I want you to take the data, put it on the spreadsheet, so you can note changes, price drops, pending, not pending. It came back. I love the idea of tweaking that and now adding solds. That wasn't as easy for me to get in 2002, but yeah, the listing websites, you just click a toggle now. You should go get that. You should basically aim to know whatever your very finite and discrete buy box is better than anybody else on the planet. Yep. That is the very simple goal, because your point is, at the end of that daily and monotonous, and yes, could be even called boring activity, you will get to that point where that once every 18 days, a property pops, and you will react first. You will react with confidence, and you will be able to strike for that good or great deal. But again, a lot of real estate investors have the goal of buying a deal. I want you just to simply know what a good deal is. And then if you happen, because again, today's market, high prices, high rates, it's hard. Most deals suck.
Yeah. And also, like, that's the problem, right? There's a good, like, if I'm looking in a zip code and I look at a deal that's the best deal in that zip code, the best price per square foot relative to a quality asset or whatever, sometimes that deal just still won't work with any type of reasonable leverage. It won't work. So that's why I kind of have these two concepts, right? A good deal is one that sells for a couple percentage points lower than its market peers, right? That means you're getting a good deal. You're getting a better price on that property relative to the rest of the stuff it's selling. A deal that works is one that cash flows that you can hang on to for the next 20, 30 years. With a nice margin of safety, you won't have to inject more capital into on a consistent basis to hold the thing on it. And that tool of like the best deal in your market could be one that doesn't work. In which case, great, you just done your homework in a few minutes, and now don't do any more real estate for this year, right? Or go pick another market or find something else because that ain't going to work. I also love the fact that you're all in one zip code. I'm not in all one zip code, and that's just going to like create such massive economies of scale over a very long period of time. That's going to just like dramatically drop operating costs for this property and for your property manager. You call up a property manager, you have a problem with your property manager, and you tell them, I got 200 properties in one zip code. You're gonna have a bidding war for that. Like you're gonna have your pick of the litter for anybody. Like that's the best portfolio to manage in town. So I love that. I wish I had done that.
Yeah. Now that just to be clear, that's what we did for the first 3 or 4 years. Obviously, as you add scale and scope, you expand the knowledge base. But again, I just want new investors to realize your goal is to learn the skill. And I believe the skill you're trying to learn is to identify what a good deal is in your defined area. It's not to buy. I think a lot of people I'm going to buy a deal this year. And Scott, I've even heard people say, I know I'm going to lose money this year, but it's the tuition I have to pay. I'm like, no, that's not okay. We
got free tuition right here. The whole point is like platforms like Bigger Pockets, like one rental at a time. Like they're just free. It's just free for the most part to consume. And it's a never ending perpetual flow of information around it so that you do not have to actually inject money into it. Although I will say, if you do not actually spend a couple hundred hours, maybe at least a couple dozen, approaching 100 hours before you buy a property, you'll spend them after you buy the property, and you'll be starting
you will.
While you're doing that to learn the game of real estate. So just your choice as a real estate investor when you want to pay that price in terms of self-education. Oh, and by the way, that's another framework here. That's why a lot of real estate investors who get started are not uber wealthy, right? Like that, like a doctor who makes $500,000-$600,000 a year is not going to spend 400 hours listening to real estate podcasts in order to learn how to do DIY a bunch of stuff, which is a critical skill later on as you begin scaling systems and don't want to get ripped off by property managers or contractors downstream on it. So a lot of the folks who get into real estate are not uber wealthy. They're also not making below a median income for sure, because that's the starting point. The economic race in order to get a mortgage on most of these properties, but that's a digression.
I love the also fact that you brought in something I call alligators, because you were really talking about negative cash flow, having to feed an asset. It's the only picture in my first book is this alligator eating bagfuls of money, because I wanted people to realize how painful that is. Because I hate the idea of, let's just buy for appreciation. I make enough money to pay this. One of the stories in my first book is an executive I was working with was proud of the fact that he could carry 4 negative cash flow properties after Katrina, right? There was these tax benefits in New Orleans.
What a wonderful gift to his employer.
Yeah. It's like, what are you doing? I mean, no, negative cash flow, not okay in my book. And I don't think buying and letting appreciation be the cherry that carries you through is okay, in my opinion. Now, lots of people disagree, but that's a hard and fast rule for me. No negative cash flow.
I live in a world of contradictions, so I will respond by saying the primary reason I invest in Denver in these types of assets is for long-term appreciation. It just has to cash flow
day one
in order so that I don't have, as you call it, the alligator consuming my money. I've called it bleeding, but I think I'm going to switch to alligator on a go-forward basis because that sounds way better. But I think that the alligator, like that type of situation is totally unacceptable to me. But once I'm past that threshold of, I feel like this property is very likely to put money into my life instead of taking it out of my life, then it's all about the maximizing for appreciation from there. Mm-hmm. So I would say that there's
there's a base. Well, there's a base, right? I can only play because every asset in my portfolio has to carry itself. I don't believe in going, I'm going to mix these two together and together they're okay. No, every asset stands alone by itself. I will not have negative cash. 100%. So the other thing you brought up that I love, I actually have a T-shirt made of this because it's so important to me.
Except my primary residence,
Of course.
So, which is not does not put money in my pocket, and I do not even consider it part of my financial portfolio, by the way. So,
ditto,
yeah.
ditto.
That one I feed. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I have the shirt that says inflation is a feature, not a bug.
Mm-hmm.
How's that hit you?
I completely agree. Right. There's a bunch of like Bitcoin people out there who really have a problem with fiat currency and talk about how it creates these evils in society in the form of inflation around there. And, from one point of view, that's correct. But I would challenge folks out there who are on the fence, or even who have these very strong pro Bitcoin or pro deflationary or static currencies that preserve nominal value in real terms in perpetuity, to read the book Naked Money, which is, I think, a really good counterpoint to a lot of like these Jekyll from Creature from Jekyll Island and other very disparaging of the Fed remarks there. The U.S. monetary system is not some insane vehicle that is really long-term problematic, in my view. And I know I'm going to get beat up for saying that. I always do on it. But there's a lot of reasons to like a small amount of inflation over a long period of time in a highly competitive geopolitical climate around the world, where remaining static is a real threat to your civilization, or you want people to be investing for growth and to be forced to do that in some senses here. At least in a place where not everyone plays nicely, and where some powers will attempt to pass the United States of America. So we're really going to get down a rabbit hole here. But I'll give another couple thoughts on this really quickly. Look at crypto and the banking world. There, in the last couple of years, we saw FTX collapse, right? And one of the problems here is that people are learning all over again that even with Bitcoin supposedly being a hard asset that will preserve its value in real terms, or even accrete in a relative sense compared to in real dollars, as it supplants international currencies. If you can still do fractional reserve banking in theory against any asset here. And when you have a bank run, for example, because you don't have a central government that can bail folks out, guess what? The whole thing can implode. So these crypto exchanges, these new attempts at reimagining money to be more like things were when everything was on a gold standard, or when it was literally gold as a currency, are learning lessons that the United States learned in the 1900s about how to manage basic elements of a banking economy in the world where fractional reserve banking is allowed. And so I'm not a big critic of the U.S. monetary system. I accept it for what it is, and I play by those rules. And that's the last point, I guess, is you can have all these stances that say, Scott's nuts. The fiat currency is a prime evil. Everyone should shift over to Bitcoin or whatever. But the rules of the game are we'll operate in a capitalist society with a fiat currency, with a money supply that is centrally controlled by the Federal Reserve, not by the government, by the Federal Reserve, right? It's not controlled by Congress, the president, and president demanding that the Fed lowers rates will have absolutely no effect whatsoever on there. So, but learn the rules, play by the game, and understand that a 2-3% nominal appreciation target is most likely what's going to happen over a very long period of time, with a couple of stretches of it being a significantly higher than that, and a couple of rare mistakes where deflation occurs on a temporary basis. And once you understand that, you can make better long-term decisions, right? I'm not going to hold dollars long-term and expect to build wealth. They will lose value. That is a feature.
No question. Yeah.
But I will hold enough to make sure I never, those few events where there is temporary deflation, I'm in a reasonable position there, and everything else will be deployed into things that will generate cash flows.
That's the name of the game. Again, inflation is a feature, not a bug. Another saying that we had when we were younger is don't hate the player, hate the game. Again, the game is what it is. You can either, rail against it and get nowhere, or understand the rules and play the game.
Absolutely. There's no perfect store of value. There is none in the economy as we've designed it. And so it's all about managing risk and accepting that. By the way, let's talk about with inflation. As there, again, the dollar is pegged to a index called the CPI of goods and services out there. And this is the attempt of the CPI is to get at the goods and services that the ordinary American purchases, constantly updated. It's a very sophisticated system. You can argue that it's wrong, but it's pretty good. It's the least bad in the world. If you don't like the term best, I use the least bad a lot of times. I think I used that the last time we talked well. But it's the least bad way to peg value in the world on there, and housing makes up a third of it. Yeah. So over a long period of time, housing is going to pace very closely to the CPI in terms of either rent growth or housing prices. So it is like, in terms of the way the game is set up, real estate is one of the best ways to peg yourself to that CPI index on there. And then you leverage against it and you get a little bit more on that.
Yeah. Again, folks, I do think, the best asset, again, is an asset that you could borrow against. And if you could borrow against it for 30 years at a fixed rate term where you have a one-way bet, if rates get worse, you're not hurt. If rates get better, you refi if you like. Cash flows day one. We've already killed the whole idea of carrying alligators. And it's indexed to inflation. Rent goes up. And of course, earlier example, 80% of the wealth comes from long-term hold. You got to be able to hold it. We talked about my wealth formula last time. Step 3 is you got to hold for 10 years. It is that simple. And that is why Bigger Pockets is the most influential real estate investing site on the planet. Scott is the CEO of that. Scott, any closing thoughts on this fun topic?
No, I'm just surprised you didn't open up by saying that if you're trying to get started in real estate, you should not have any job, no assets, no credit, and then you should finance a guru program on a credit card for $400 a month over the next 2 years, because that will help you find your deal. I'm just so shocked you didn't start off there. So I don't know.
I appreciate you, man. You are awesome, folks. Go to Bigger Pockets. Check it out. Scott has sent it on a new trajectory. He is focused on helping all of you get started and make your money, get rich, get wealthy. Scott, you're amazing. Take care.
Thanks, Michael. Bye.
Bye.
How was that?